Right, that was quick. Hello there. So today we're going to continue on with the skirt and try and fix it so that it works properly in IMVU, because importing it yesterday, which we'll do again today, well, we'll do that in a minute, we discovered that some of the weight painting things and the mesh stuff that we were talking about still resulted in some issues and errors. So we have to fix them before we can publish and upload the clothing item, to the catalog. So let's import and assemble the Fbx file. So it's a female bottom, which is the cargo shorts. So import Fbx, load Fbx. What did we call this? Skirt pleated 8. 7, 8. So as before, as we said yesterday, when you're importing your Fbx clothing files in particular, when we get the skeleton select skeleton root dialog, we tend to need to select the option with the fewest bones, and that is usually 87 for clothing. So 87 and 1 mesh. It's typically going to be 87. There may be more than 1 mesh depending on what your clothing item is. So select that, configure Fbx, apply scale 0.01, replacing the pelvis. So it's got our materials, that's okay. Import, apply changes, and there is our skirt. So we've also got some shading errors. So these belt loops are lighter at the top than they are at the bottom, and they don't necessarily match what the avatar, the belt section, is doing. So I have to take a look at that. So let's make a note of that. So there's belt loop shading, and we've got all these clipped areas. Side clipping. And that is likely going to be because the mesh is too close to the avatar rather than a weight painting issue. And then let's add a furniture item. Sit down. So we've got some more clipping. So these are all issues that are fixable and do not require adding an underlying mesh that's going to be coloured the same as the skirt or textured the same as the skirt. If we fix these, we don't have to do that. So that looks okay. So let's just save this. Pleated skirt 1. So now comes the bit, oh, and there was a weight painting issue. Oh, we need to make this double-sided so that we can, so two-sided. And there was an issue with the belt loops. It was this one, I think. Weight paint. So that looks like it's being controlled. So let's take a look at that first. So in Blender we've got the skirt already loaded. Right, so we want to go into edit mode for this, because although we could be in weight paint mode, what we want to do is check the groups. So if one of these elements is inadvertently being controlled, it can sometimes be tricky to see what group has control over what vertex. So an easy way to determine that is to go into edit mode, make sure nothing is selected, so select none. And then what we want to do is use the vertex groups, and we want to select a listing and then use the buttons at the bottom to select all the vertexes that are currently associated with that group. This won't tell us the values, it's just identifying, let's go into vertex mode, it's just identifying the vertexes. So we've got some stray vertices that we need to get rid of. So these three in particular. So we select them, so that's shift click, and then we can use the remove button to remove those selected vertexes. So click remove. We need to deselect, and then if we select pelvis node again, those vertexes are no longer selected. Hang on a second, I'm just going to have to close the browser because it's making the computer flare up. Right, close that. Right, so that's that. Need to check spine. So deselect. So those are all right. So again, we've got some stray vertexes, so we don't need these. Select, remove. We shouldn't have any for spine 02, but we do. Oh, so that's why. So that confirms the problem that we were having. So when the avatar goes into certain positions or takes on certain poses, some of these belt loops disappear, or they distort, they unduly distort. And that is because, as we've just discovered, these belt loops, or these sections of the mesh, are controlled by an errant, well, another vertex group, which we don't want to do. See how that one there is now distorting out of sync with the belt. Ooh, we can zoom in. So we've got the belt here. Ooh, that's dodgy. And then we've got the belt loop out of sync with it. And that is because the vertex groups are. So what we need to do, back in Blender, let's double check. Go into X-ray mode. So deselect all. So that's Alt A. Spine, select. So remove, deselect, and that's removed them from the group. So spine 01. Pelvis node. So I need to check the weight paint values for this. So skeleton, weight paint. Right, so we do have, I don't know how clear these lighter blue. So there are some weight paint values associated with these vertexes. So we want to keep those. But it's not particularly even, so there's our vertex weights, right thigh. So we're on pelvis node. So what we can do, so that's the sidebar. So view sidebar. So when it gets difficult to determine the influence a bone has the weight value, so the weight value that's associated with a particular vertex and a bone that it's linked to, what we can do in the sidebar, so view sidebar, what we can do is in the item, because this is an item selection, so we're selecting an individual component. So in the item menu options, we've got this vertex weights section, and this lists all the vertices, not the vertices, all the vertex groups that are associated with the selected vertex. So we've got one vertex selected, and as we select different ones, we can see the values change depending on what the vertex is and the bone that has influence over it. So these ones, pelvis node, select. Unfortunately, it can't do multiples. So we can see that pelvis node does influence these, which is okay. So that's all right. So let's try exporting this again to see how much that's fixed. Just doing that. So left hip. Make sure we're not selected. Select. Oof. That's a bit messy. So that's the left side. That's the right side. So that's left hip. What's the right hip like? Right hip. Right, so it's possible that some of the deformation that we're seeing when the character strikes a certain pose, so those bits of clipping that we were seeing earlier, those could very well be because of the influence that we're seeing around the belt in particular. So what we want to do is essentially remove the influence of, this is going to be tricky. So let's go front view. So what we're going to do is paint deselect. So press the C key and we get the paint select thing, and then all we do is middle mouse click to deselect vertexes that we don't want. Not quite sure about these ones down here, so we'll deselect those for now. So we can remove those. Do the same on the other side. Paint select, paint deselect. Remove. Oh, you know what? Undo. Because what we might be seeing so because we've still got the avatar's torso section in place. So have to redo those or undo them. In fact, we'll probably have to reload the file because I've gone a bit too far, so I have to reload the file. 8. Don't save. Right, so what did we do? So before we do anything, what we want to do is move. So we're going to select the skin. We're going to select the torso section based on the material that's assigned to it. So select. We're just going to move it to one side. We could also just detach it. So you select it and then mesh and it's separate selection. Mesh, separate selection. And that'll detach it as a completely separate object that we can then just hide. Right, so let's do that again. So this is one of the reasons why you have version saves, because if you make a mistake like we just did, an oversight, what we can do is just revert back to the file that we had saved previously before we do any more work to correct the issue. So now that we've done that, we should now be able to, so pelvis node, make sure nothing is selected, vertex mode, so select, so we want to remove these. We want to keep these ones. Spine 01. So it was these ones as well I wanted to remove. Double check. Spine 02. So this is the one that we needed to get rid of. So remove, select, so that's not got anything selected, so that's fine. Then hips. So we want to go into front. So we're using the viewports. So if you've not got a full keyboard, you're using a laptop, you can go into the view menu, just the viewpoint, and that'll give you the different options for front, back, top, right. So what we want to do here, in fact, let's just unhide. We need to do something again, so we need to double check. So we have to join the two meshes back together again. We need to check the weight colors, the weight paint values. Right, so the hip bones shouldn't select any of the vertexes to do with the belt. So we can clean those and get rid of them from the group. So object mode, select skirt. We'll leave that attached. So what we want to do here then, deselect, we want circle select again, circle select, select all of this, and then remove. So select, and it should only have the hips. Do the same on the other side. So what we're trying to do is essentially, as we discussed in, was it yesterday's? Yesterday's. what we're trying to do is replicate the avatars weight groups. So the way that those are distributed across the mesh, we're trying to replicate that on a skirt or clothing item. It doesn't matter what it is, but so let's get the belt sorted out first. So deselect hip. Same again. So select, circle select. And then remove. So what we can do now is get rid of these stray vertexes that shouldn't be selected. We'll leave these ones on the far side because I'm not too sure about those, but we'll need to check the weight paint values again, or the colours. So skeleton, whoops, skeleton, mesh, weight paint mode. Why is that gone funny? Doesn't like that at all. Well, that's why. Blender's a bit finicky now with transparency, or not transparency, X-ray, the way that something is see-through. So in wireframe, we don't actually see the wireframe anymore. That's wireframe mode. But in order to see the actual wireframe like we used to do in 2.79, we have to enable X-ray. So that's this button here. And then we get what we're used to with Blender 2.79 and below. But for weight painting, if you have X-ray on and you're in solid mode or one of the other modes, it makes the mesh appear funny, which you might need, but for weight painting it makes it quite tricky to see what's going on. But as you'll see, the X-ray button is not active, so it's not I don't know what it's doing actually. It's not carrying that X-ray property properly across or not into weight paint mode. Anywho, so weight painting. So what were we doing? Oh yes, so we do have some weight values. So we can see there's a color difference in this section. It's all slightly pale blue, whereas this is dark blue. So dark blue is no influence, and the pale blue is going to be something like is 0.01 or below. So that is influencing the mesh, so we want to keep those. Okay, so we want to keep those. So again, we're trying to replicate the default as much as possible that's on the avatar on this side. But obviously the actual values that are used will vary, because obviously a clothing item is not like the butt cheeks. Whoops. Right, okay, so let's try that then. So we'll export this. Version safer, well no, what we can do, select the mesh. So as we were talking about, not yesterday, day before, well, one of the previous videos, in the same way that you can use vertex groups to select sections of the mesh. So what we did is we set up some custom vertex groups that are specifically associated with the mesh to help us make selections of the mesh so that we don't have to keep doing it manually. So we had got a stray vertex there, that shouldn't be there. So click that, get rid of it. So what we had was the apex of the folds or the pleats or whatever these are called. So we can select those as a group instead of having to manually shift click each of them in turn and wasting a lot of time doing that. So what we can do is we can set up a vertex group. So we make our selection, create our group, and then assign those vertexes to that group, and that then allows us to select the group with a click of a button that we can then edit and manipulate. And if you use them strategically, so we've got the apex of the folds, but we've also got the inner bits, the troughs or whatever these are called, and we can do the same thing. So we can edit those as well, and it's just a quick selection. But we've also got, so let's zoom out a little bit, belt, so that selects all the belt section. We've got the skirt, that selects everything to do with the skirt. Also includes the belt loops, but what we can do is with a belt loop group we can use that to deselect elements or select the belt loops on their own. So using our vertex groups we can do all sorts of selection mechanisms, shortcuts in a sense. And then of course we've got the buckle. So in the same way that you can select sections or elements, or subsections of your mesh with vertex groups, you do the same thing with materials. So that's object data properties. In material properties, we can do the same thing with our material assignments. So we've got two, skirt and skin. So if we select skirt, that'll select everything to do with the skirt. We can deselect. If we want skin, we can select everything to do with the skin on that side. So we don't have to muck around making manual selections. Right, so deselect, exit edit mode, and let's save this. Save as number 9. And then we'll export. So skeleton, mesh, file, export, Fbx, file location number 9. So we want selected objects. Everything else is okay. Geometry, apply modifiers, that's okay. Armatures, always disable, add leaf bones. And we don't need bake animation. File name number 9, then export. So IMVU. So we'll keep this one as a reference. So create, derive new product, bottom, go, and then we want to import this new version of the file. So Fbx Import, load Fbx, skirt number 9, again lowest number of bones and mesh, configure, pelvis, so mesh ID number 5, materials are okay, scale 0.01, import changes, and then apply changes. So we've still got some clipping, but the belt loops are okay now. So drop in a furniture item. So it was a good idea to use the same one. And then we can double check. Yeah, so we've got clipping. That's okay. That's where most of the clipping tends to occur, is on the butt and on the front, which we went over yesterday, I think, on the video, the stream where we were talking about white painting. So that could be because we are too close to the avatar, so the clipping that we were seeing. I have to wait for the avatar to cycle through the animations. So it's only on that side really. Make that double-sided. So that is that side. Oh yes, so there's just a little bit poking through in the mesh there, so we are a bit too close. So what we can do here is select those, either vertexes, edges or faces, it doesn't matter which. And we want to move this section as a group so the belt loop moves with it. And we can use local for this, or normal, so that the selection moves in a tangent to the selection that's being made. And we don't need to move it by too much. go back to IMVU. And that looks okay, so let's try that. So save this as a different file, 10. And then export that. Export Fbx number 10. Same option, selected objects. That's okay. Disabled, disabled. Another project. Go. And then we now need to import that file. So Fbx Import, load Fbx. This is number 10. .01, mesh ID 5, materials are okay, import, apply changes, that looks okay initially, then hey. Oh, there's a little bit poking out now at the back. So this is one of the problems with clothing, because we can't toggle through. So there's a bit on the belt, a bit on the butt, and there's a little bit there. Oh, and there's a bit there now. So this is tricky because with clothing we don't have the ability to pose or pause the animation. And that forward leaning pose is a really tricky one to accommodate, because it causes the whole front of the mesh to collapse. So let's see if it does it again. And literally half the time is spent waiting for the avatar to switch poses so that we can test and see what the difference is, or any errors. It would be nice to be able to just, I guess it would be in actions, just click something in here and view the specific poses that the avatar uses by default. And here we have to wait. Get the screen grab ready. Nope. Whoops, that was the wrong one. So drop that into a image editor. Come on, switch pose. So we've got a bit there as well now. So this is a good thing to do, is just take screenshots . But of course it's still waiting for it to do the pose that we need. Right, there we go. And there's the other one. Oh, so now it's doing it all the time. So you have to decide how much to the nth degree you want to go in fixing these sorts of problems. And as mentioned earlier, a lot of people tend to fix them by including an underlying mesh that can be colored the same or tinted the same as the clothing item itself. If you can avoid doing that, it's best to so that is this one. So that's that one. So other side. So that's this pair. Oops. That's that one. So done that one, which is okay. So let's adjust that. And we obviously want to make sure that we're not too unduly distorting the shape of the mesh, the overall profile that we created. So that's the profile, the outline essentially. That is probably going to be a weight painting issue, so we'll have to come back to that. Butt cheeks. So that's that edge selection. And of course, we don't have a corresponding set of poses that we can test the character in Blender. I don't even think Max users have that. So, you know, you can't pose the character in the poses that IMVU uses because they're not even included for Max users. So, you know, just because we are using Blender doesn't mean that this is any it would be any easier in 3D Studio Max. But again, we want to be sure that we're not unduly changing the profile that we've got. And then what else is there? So that's probably another weight painting issue as well. So let's try these. I'm going to save the file. And export. That's 11. Same settings. So IMVU and another project. You don't have to keep creating projects, but it's a good idea to do because you then have at least a reference point to go back and forth to check your meshes or your corrections to see how you've progressed. So this is 11. But this is clothing. This is what you have to do with clothing. It's very rare that you'll make something and it'll work the first time. So if you're wanting to get into clothing, all of this fiddling around and adjustment, export, test, assembly, adjustment, back in Blender again, export again, assembly, you will find that you have to do it quite a bit in order to get everything to work the way that you expect it to. So the same furniture item. Double-sided. Whoops. So, yes, that's fixed the minor issues. What we need to do now, that looks like it has, it's fixed those minor issues. So that basically means that our mesh skirt mesh was too close, a little too close to the avatar torso. Yes, so that's okay. So all we need to do now is tackle the mesh collapse at the front section here on both sides when the character leans forward. So for that, what we may need to do, switch to pose mode. So we're selecting the armature on its own. Now it's to determine how got to work out how the character is. So that's probably why it's collapsing, because IMVU are using the spine bone to tilt the character forward. But that collapses. Oh, well, don't have to worry about that. But undo. See, that looks okay in Blender. So there's the collapse. Let's hide the. Can we put that in wireframe? Let's put that in wireframe. Oh, it is in wire. So what they are doing to get the avatar to lean forward like that, what they must be doing is modifying the lower spine bone on its own. Instead of doing an incremental, instead of doing this where you might incrementally lean the character forward by using several bones to do that, what they've done is animated it or posed it by just selecting the spine bone at the bottom and tilting that forward, and then I guess correcting that forward tilt by moving the other bones backwards. So this results in this collapsed mesh, and I have absolutely no idea how we can fix that with weight painting, because you can see how much it's caused the mesh to collapse in on itself. I wonder if that does that with the shorts. Let's add the hay bale. So we can already see how low the belt on the shorts are compared to these relatively high-waisted clothing items. Come on, lean forward. But let's test something. I wonder. Now where is it? Oh, let's just drop that in. That is why we don't have to, well, that's why IMVU doesn't have to deal with that problem. Because they've left that section of the torso out. So, oh, that's sneaky. That's really, really sneaky. So let's have a look at the image. Yeah. So they get round the problem by cutting that section of the mesh out. So let's straighten that up. Select mesh. Edit mode. Skirt, select, hide. So they get round that particular problem for that particular item by cutting this section of the mesh out. So when the avatar leans forward, it doesn't collapse into the torso. So when you're making your clothing items, you have to decide whether to do that or not. It obviously means that you limit, if this is going to be a derivable item, you limit the extent to which you can be, or to which you allow creative derivations of your products. Because if someone wants to do, if someone wants to use opacities to then, I don't know, shorten the length of the skirt. So for example, let's say that they wanted this to be shorter, you could use an opacity to crop that section out. Makes the skirt shorter, but if you, as the author of the mesh, if you've chopped out a big section of the mesh to accommodate the mesh collapsing when you use your because weight painting isn't necessarily going to fix that problem. So if you leave that section of the mesh out, you limit how much a deriver can alter your mesh before they start getting into problems themselves, because they clip too far. So you could use an opacity, go all the way up to the top here, and you'd have the top of the legs missing. So solving certain problems are quite tricky depending on the outcomes that you want from the clothing item. And depending on whether it's just an item for your own use, then it doesn't matter. But if it's derivable, which is why you see so many of these products with layers and layers and layers of mesh structure underneath, So with all of that said, I don't know if we're going to be able to solve that particular problem with weight painting. Well, not within the time that we've already spent an hour and 10 minutes on this, so we're calling it quits soon. But this just goes to show how fiddly and tricky clothing can be depending on the design of your clothing items, and that you do have to decide at some point so let's just pose that again. Ew, that's weird. Why is it deforming oddly like that? Oh, that's why local, so global. So we can tilt this section forward as much as we like, and it doesn't matter how much it collapses. Without that torso section there, it doesn't matter. So we've got this huge bit of collapsed mesh just here. I don't know how easy this is to discern in the video, in the stream rather, but we've got this big concave section here, and it's on both sides. Although it's not so big. Oh yes, it is. So there's a big concave section in there, and I don't think that's going to be fixable with weight painting. Let's take a look anyway. So we'll take a look and see what's going on, and then just call it quits there, because I am going to guess that that is going to take a bit of tweaking to sort out. Oh no, maybe not. So what was that? 0.5. Maybe not. So let's straighten that. So where are we? Undo, undo. So to find your way on the mesh, so we want to look at this as our feature. That's our anchor point in terms of where are we on this mesh as we're looking at this. So this triangle section, and then it's the edges forward from that triangle section. So there's an edge there, and it drops through. So this is our reference point, this edge. So we've got an edge that's going through there, and then obviously it goes in through the front of the mesh. So when we straighten the avatar up, that's our reference, and it's these two edges, or it's these edges in particular, I guess, that run around the front of the mesh. So 0.5. Same on the other side. So that's our reference edge. What I may do, 0.125. So select those two, rotate them again just into rotate that forward. So we might have solved it with just that little tweak. So we've included these two vertexes and the one that's hidden in here. So we've included those in the same group. So what happens if we use a full? So we can make it distort quite a bit or not so much. So quite a bit or not so much. But then do we want to, so if that becomes, whoops, if that's fully influenced, do we then want to include this one? That doesn't change that much. So let's try that. So we'll do this as the last export and then we'll call it quits there. Otherwise, this will go on forever and ever. Whoops. But it highlights how tricky all of this weight painting stuff is when you start to do complex designs, relatively speaking. Select, move that back, save the file again. This is 12. So skeleton, mesh, file, export, Fbx, 12, settings, that's okay, export, back into IMVU. Let's do this one more time. Don't know whether this will have actually fixed the problem, but we'll give it a go. Where is it? 12. So that's working. Oh, there's a little bit of clipping there, just above the thumb. So this is what you have to do. This is the process. It generally isn't as easy as one might expect, but this is what you have to do. Yeah, so it's not as bad, but it's still clipping. So there you are. We have to go back over this and spend a bit more time with it and sort out the mesh distortion that's occurring. And that looks like it's going to be a weight paint problem. We could edit the mesh in conjunction with fixing the weight painting values. So back in Blender, what we can do is, whoops, adjust some of the vertexes at those points so they're not quite as close to the, I mean, it's not that close to the avatar as it is, but we can adjust some of those to see if we can fix the problem a bit more that way or mitigate it. But this is typical of clothing. So once you've got your clothing item made, you're going to spend most of your time trying to fix weight painting issues like this. And if you can, try and avoid using the inside mesh approach to solving the problem, because it doesn't really solve the problem as such. It hides it and presents a whole another host of issues depending on the design that you enable or facilitate for derivation. So that's not always a quick and it's a quick and dirty solution, but it's not ideal. So yeah, that's weight painting for you. That's clothing. So that's fixing errors. So yesterday we discussed all the weight painting stuff. The day before, Vertex Group's selection. Oh, you've just hi Gaff. You've just joined us as we're calling it quits. So we've been going for about an hour and 20 minutes just on weight painting and trying to fix a skirt. Yeah, typical, yes. Fashionably late. But the stream's going to be archived, so it's watchable after the fact. But just for you, we were going over fixing, now that we had the skirt imported, we've got all these clipping issues that we had to sort out. So we've just been talking about how to sort those out, how we can fix them by editing the mesh and adjusting weight paint values and making sure that our Vertex Group assignments are properly set up. So we're only influencing the bits of the mesh that we want. Artisan work, yes. So that's it. So it's a lot of fiddling and tweaking. You won't get your clothing items sorted out first, and of course you have to decide whether you want to include or remove sections of the torso, as IMVU has done for their, because that's an optimization technique, that, but it does mean that you end up with these clipping errors. So we have to consider those. Oh, and that's clipping through there more now. See, so that's the thing. So we've weighted this in that lean back pose. That section of the mesh is fine, but adjusting the weight values to compensate for the lean forward pose where the mesh collapses in on itself, we've now introduced mesh clipping, because the weight value that's associated with those couple of edges that we weighted, so it's going to be these two edges leading up to this triangle split. So these two edges now belong to the leg, the thigh bone. And because the thigh bone now influences those two edges, it's pulling them out of shape. And in doing that, it means that it's causing that section of the mesh to go concave where it wasn't doing that before. So that's the problem that you've got, is that you can fix the problem one way, but you introduce a problem another way. And that's where you have to decide whether just to cut out that section of the avatar that's causing problems that is not going to be seen otherwise underneath the skirt, particularly if the skirt or the clothing item, whether it's a pair of shorts or trousers, it doesn't really matter. Yes, so you end up just removing the part of the mesh that's going to be causing problems. But again, that limits the options derivers have for doing things with the mesh. So you couldn't do a ripped skirt, like, ripped denim skirt with holes in. So it's you can fix it on one side, but it breaks it on another. So decisions. Right, so we'll call it quits there. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes, nearly an hour and a half. So thanks for lurkers. Yeah, it is. Hopefully I'll get this sorted out and actually into the catalogue. But anyway, yes, so I'll call it quits there. Thanks for lurkers. Thanks for chatting in ChatGaff. And we shall see you on the next. Yeah, it's going to need a lot of luck. We'll see you on the next one, which might be a different project. Might be making a room next. I have to wait and see. So we'll make a room. A very simple room. Right. See you anon, as they say. Bye for now, everyone.